I guess it's official.
Yeah, it is official. So, Alexis, would you like to do the introduction or shall I?
I can do it.
Okay.
Well, thank you guys for coming to our first session in the summer gardening series offered by Petra Page-Mann from Fruition Seeds. This session, as you know, is being offered cooperatively by several libraries through the Pioneer Library System and being, I guess, sponsored by the Macedon Library through their Zoom system today. And we will turn it over to Petra Page-Mann to get started on our container gardening series for today.
Thank you so much, Alexis, and thank you so much to all of the 15 libraries collaborating on this series. It just sends shivers down my spine that we're all adapting to these times. And thank you everyone who showed up live and to everyone who's showing up after the fact, and I'm so delighted to jump in. So first and foremost, I have some questions for you all. And the first one might seem obvious. How many of you love to grow in containers? Raise your hands. Yes. And how many of you have gardened in containers more than 5 years? Yes, amazing. Anyone more than 20 years? Anyone more than 50 years? My grandmother would totally raise her hand. and is there anyone here that this is their first year gardening in containers? Amazing. Well, friends, welcome. Whether you've been gardening 1 year, 5 days, -5 days, or the net for 50 years, I am really confident that we can be friends. And I'm delighted to share with you so much of what I've learned in my tiny little lifetime of growing in containers, almost 4 decades now. And I'm just, again, round of Zoom applause to all of the libraries making this possible and everyone who is leaning into this opportunity to grow in this time. And hello, by the way, my name is Petra. I'm Petra Page-Mann, and I grew up in my father's garden here in the Naples Valley. So we had great big gardens. To me, they were great big gardens in the soil. We also had raised beds. We had wine barrels cut in half that we used as container gardens. And it was a huge garden in my mind. Turns out it was a 40 by 40 garden, which isn't a big garden, but isn't a small garden. But in my mind, it was this huge garden. And I've always loved food, but it wasn't until late into my teenage years that I realized that food and agriculture was really something that I didn't know how to relate to the world, if not through that lens. And so I spent over a decade working on different organic farms across the country and around the world. I got really interested in seeds. And so I actually moved back to Naples, here, my hometown, in 2012. And I founded, with my partner Matthew, Fruition Seeds. And we grow organic, regionally adapted seeds for short seasons because I thought we couldn't grow watermelons easily in my father's garden. And turns out you can grow watermelons easily here. You just need the right seeds and also the right resources. When we were starting to grow and share all of these seeds with people, I realized that the limiting factor often in people's lives isn't in fact having really high quality seeds, although that is a huge limiting factor. A lot of people just don't know how to grow food and gardens, period. And so Fruition Seeds is deeply dedicated not only to growing exceptional organic regionally adapted seeds, but to sharing resources like today, everything that I'm going to share with you. And we have hundreds of videos on our YouTube channel. Every day I'm posting on social media. We have a beautiful weekly email, and we have a great big blog. Our website has tons of info. So I hope that you know that today is the beginning of what I hope is a lifelong conversation that we will share. And certainly we have lots of on-farm tours and workshops, all kinds of experiences. So definitely don't be shy. All those watermelons, P.S., we just grow for seeds. So at the end of August, we always have a watermelon party because we grow all of these organic watermelons just for the seeds. So it's an all-you-can-eat watermelon extravaganza amid thousands of blossoming dahlias. So without further ado, I can't wait to dig in to container gardening. And here are 8 keys of container gardening that I'm excited to share with you today. I'll give you the quick list, and then we'll dive into all the keys in a little greater depth. And then we're going to actually, how many of you came today with a container and are excited to plant some seeds with me in containers? So I'm gonna plant some in containers right here with you too. So here's the laundry list. We're gonna talk about why, number 1, bigger is better, which is a phrase I only use for container gardening. Bigger is better. Number 2, space efficient varieties make all the difference. Number 3, take soil seriously right from the start. Number 4, light. Let there be light. Number 5, good neighbors and no crowding equals abundance. Number 6, watering woes. There's a lot of them. We'll talk about them. Number 7, succession sowing, because who doesn't want to eat salad every day of the year? So we succession sow. And number 8, all things come to an end. And so we'll talk about what to do at the end of the season so that your containers can be really vibrant, not only in this season, but for seasons to come. So there's the overview of where we're going today. And now let's dig in. So number 1, bigger is better. Oh, and let me briefly interrupt myself as well. We have a whole lots of online courses. We actually have a container gardening mini course. And last week we decided to make it free because we've been getting all kinds of questions, and COVID-19 and everything else in the world. We're like, we all need to be more generous than ever before. So it's a whole $45 course that's now totally free. And if you hop on our website, it's right there on our homepage. So I can't wait to share that with you. And that has downloads, all kinds of resources, totally free. So everything that I'm talking about today in greater detail. So yes, number 1, bigger is better. So that means if you have a 15-gallon container, that's way better than a 10-gallon container. That 10-gallon container is way better than a 5, is way better than a 2. And here's how I think about it. If you have a thimble of soil versus a great big container of soil, it's kind of like going to a buffet with a thimble that you can only fill up once. And all of a sudden you're going to be hungry really quick. So even though this 15-gallon fabric container, which is actually recycled plastic water bottles, isn't that amazing? So this container, even though it looks much larger than a thimble, is nonetheless a thimble of soil compared to what your plants will have access to outside in real soil with full access to all the nutrients that the roots can access. So it makes all the difference in the world to have both a bigger container and just a better quality soil. If you have 15 gallons of potting mix, it really doesn't matter. That isn't going to cut it. But that's number 3. We'll talk about taking soil seriously from the start in a few minutes. So yes, there's lots of different containers to consider. So this is recycled plastic water bottles. Amazing. It's a fabric. So what I love about it is they actually drain moisture, which, let's just back up. You can grow anything in a container as long as that container, A, holds soil. I know, rocket science, but B, drains, and drains really well. So that drainage is key, and a lot of containers don't drain well enough, especially for vegetables. So what I love about this, the plastic water bottles woven into this fabric, is excess water just drains out effortlessly. And also the air actually permeates on the sides as well. And so roots naturally air prune rather than getting root bound. So, I mean, let's just imagine for a moment, roots for millions of years have evolved when they hit the air to go around the other way. And so that's what creates root bound plants. And some of your houseplants don't mind being root bound. For example, jades love being root bound. And I forgot to mention already, I brought one of my houseplants to say hello. Fun little show and tell. So true stories, it's a lot easier to grow most houseplants than to grow abundant container gardens. And here's why. Most houseplants, especially here in modern day America, if it's been commercialized and commodified to the extent that we have them as commonly available houseplants, chances are they're from the desert and they survive in extremely arid, dry conditions, which is kind of certainly life in my house. Although we keep our house pretty cool in the winter by comparison. I'm generally out in our garden or on the farm instead of taking care of my houseplants. So I can't tell you how many houseplants I've killed across the years because I just don't take great care of them. But the ones I do have are succulents and cacti that can totally hack it. There really aren't any garden vegetables that can thrive with absolutely benign neglect. And we'll talk about varieties in a few minutes too. But just to say, container gardens, especially if you really want them to be super abundant, you really don't have a choice but to really put a lot of tender, loving care into them. And the nice thing about it, just like when I first started to learn how to tie my shoes, I was like, Mom, Velcro is so much easier. And I tied my shoes pretty poorly for a little while. But then when I got it, now you get it. So you'll see in your container gardening journey that you'll have some failures, and that's part of what success looks like too. And as you're taking notes and learning and amplifying those successes, you'll look back and be like, wow, did I really struggle with XYZ back in the day? And we all did with something at some point. But yes, don't let yourself get deterred. And I'm here for you in all seasons, my friends. So yes, I want to talk too about, I'm really in love with these fabric containers because they drain and they air prune. A lot of people have, terracotta. And so the thing about terracotta is it's really beautiful. The other thing about terracotta is it gets really hot really fast. Another thing about it is that the clay actually sucks moisture out of the soil around it. So I love terracotta just for its aesthetic. The vast majority of my houseplants are in some kind of terracotta, but I don't grow a single vegetable in terracotta or flower or herb because it just dries out so much faster on so many levels, and they generally don't drain especially as well as the fabric too. Containers like this that are plastic, are in the middle, second best. They don't drain as well, but they don't get nearly as hot, and they don't suck any moisture out of the soil around them. So there are a few considerations. I love seeing, you'll see often people have those big metal kind of cattle troughs or horse troughs that you can drill holes in the bottom and then they drain, and that's awesome too. So I highly recommend that as well. That just takes up a ton of soil because generally those are 50 to 100 gallons if not more, but again, bigger is better. So if you're really going for it, you will have way more abundance in a great big trough as long as it drains really well. And I also wanted to lift up in the houseplant department, I even take the drainage for granted sometimes, like this lovely little old creamer. I'm like, oh, stick a plant in it. So there's no hole in the bottom, and that is only think outside the box. And I just want to, we have to be thinking critically all the time now. Don't let anyone tell you what to think and take it for granted. And that we live at a time where it's so important to be thinking for ourselves and listening to voices that we might not otherwise be listening to. And so yes, even in container gardening, take it to the extreme, take it to the edges, but as long as it drains really well, and the bigger you have it, the more abundant you will find your plants. So number 2, let's talk about space-efficient varieties, because space-efficient varieties make all the difference. So I made a whole little collection for us to explore. And before I begin, a lot of it comes to height and size, like what are the most compact varieties? And also then thinking about how they grow alongside other plants. And as a general rule, plants that are leafy require less energy, less nutrients to grow, abundance, than a plant that's flowering or fruiting. And so think of it this way. Leaves are solar arrays, right? They're photosynthesizing sunlight, turning them into sugar, into carbon. What? Plants are amazing. So if you're just growing leaves, you can grow a lot more leaf with a lot less soil and a lot less nutrients, also a lot less light. So without question, the most abundant, easy to grow plants in containers are leaves. So think parsley, think basil, think lettuce, kale, arugula. So yes, here, let's dive in. So here is, yes, right from the top. Did I make it that obvious? I'm such a sucker for arugula and any kind of salad mix, really, whether it's lettuce mix or a mesclun mix. Baby bok choy is an amazing choice. And there are lots of different kales. Kale in general really thrives in containers, but check it out, there are dwarf kales. And so that literally will only get about 2.5 feet tall. And instead of having 6 inches between each petiole, each branch coming off, it's like 1/8 of an inch. So it's like this little tiny, beautiful, super productive palm tree of a kale plant. Swiss chard is another one that is so easy to grow and fabulous in containers. And again, kale as well as Swiss chard, you can start them now. You could even have planted them in the beginning of April, and you'd be eating them by now, and you will be eating them. You can honestly, I'm confident you can have it on your Thanksgiving table if you're feeding them well. So those are crops that you don't necessarily have to succession sow to be surrounded by a lot of abundance. People love to eat spinach, so I wanted to mention spinach is fabulous in containers, but only in the cool seasons. There's actually an Asian spinach that loves cool weather as well as hot weather. So after Memorial Day here, we're in zone 5 here in the Finger Lakes in Naples. If you're more toward Monroe or Rochester area, you might be closer to 6, especially if you're on the lake. But either way, after Memorial Day, it's too hot to grow classic spinach well, but Asian spinach all day long. And I wanted to mention a couple other things about lettuces too. So there are really compact lettuces, like this winter density lettuce that actually is really great in the summer too, ironically, but it's a small compact lettuce. So that is a perfect choice for containers. And also romaines, which are all different color, shape, sizes of romaines, and experiment. There's over 1,000 varieties of lettuce, which is just breathtakingly beautiful. It's like one of the most gorgeous ambassadors for diversity in our lives. And romaine is so good in containers because they grow like this. And when you're growing in a small space, you really want to be optimizing your space. And so if things are growing up rather than out, that is a perfect way to think about how to leverage your space better. So herbs, let's talk. And I want to mention too, in the herb department, I grew up with my mother also having a single container where I grew up in my father's garden. My father has also a conservatory of house plants and a great big garden to this day. But my mother wants to be doing 1,000 other things with her life besides gardening. But she had a halved wine barrel, and I never remember her weeding it. I never remember her watering it. I never remember her putting any kind of compost or fish emulsion or anything on it. And when I asked her a few years ago, I was like, Mom, did you ever do anything to that except harvest it? She said, no, I never did anything. And she grew thyme, oregano, and chives in that container garden. So yes, those perennials will thrive with remarkably little hesitation. And again, those are from really arid climates, Mediterranean climates, and so they've evolved to survive in really sandy soil with very few nutrients and that are really dry and just make it happen. So yes, without further ado, here's a laundry list. Basil is amazing, including Tulsi basil, one of my favorites. Cilantro grows so well in containers, and dill grows so well in containers. Lemon balm is a wonderful perennial that loves to grow in containers too. So yeah, thyme, oregano, phenomenal choices. Oh, and parsley, and I wanted to lift up, we have, perhaps you heard, with COVID-19, our printer isn't printing, so we were able to find blank seed packets and hire local artists to make amazing original art on some of our packets. So there's our parsley, and here's our dill as well. So those are little Daryl Abraham pieces. And catnip is another fantastically easy to grow perennial that loves growing in containers, and mint as well. This is a Kathy Engel watercolor. But mint, there's a number of different kinds, but especially if you're going one that likes to trail, classic mint, whoa, keep it in a container because it will take over everything so fast. So here are a few other things. So those are the easiest things to grow in containers because they are just leaves and they're all really space efficient. So here are a few other things that you can grow in containers. Beans grow quite well in containers. Just make sure it's a huge container. And let me back up with leaves, whether it's lettuce mix, dill, basil, you want to make sure they have at least a 5-gallon container. Less than that, you'll get a little bit of abundance, but not that much. It probably won't regrow. As soon as you're in a 10-gallon or more, you can expect to harvest 2-3 times, if not more. So, but as soon as you get into these other things that I'm about to share, make sure it's at least a 10-gallon container. So yes, beans grow really well in containers, especially bush beans. I find that bush compared to pole beans, they are more compact and they just seem to be more productive. Where a thing about a bush beans versus pole beans, they tend to grow about the same amount of abundance, but bush beans concentrate that abundance in a 3.5 week period, where a pole bean is going to create that same amount of abundance, but over an 8+ week period. So instead of a whole ton of beans at once, it's a few here, a few there every day. So I personally find that pole beans are not as productive as bush beans in a container garden context. And peas are totally possible to grow in containers. Again, 10 gallons or larger, and check it out. There's dwarf peas. You don't want to grow full-size peas in a container, no matter how large. I never recommend it because instead of getting a dwarf plant will only be 2-3 feet tall max. A full-size plant wants to be 5, even 6 feet tall, and will be stressed if it has a smaller volume of soil and they're much harder to trellis in a container as well. So dwarf peas make all the difference, and it's a little late to be sowing the spinach, like I said, in our climate now. It's too late to be sowing the peas as well, except plant them in the beginning of August for your sweet fall peas, and that will be the best. You can also plant peanuts in containers, who knew? And peanuts are fantastically easy to grow. And again, just 10 gallons or larger. And not all varieties are created equal. Again, I thought we couldn't grow peanuts because we grew peanuts once in my father's garden. We grew 5 plants, harvested 5 peanuts, and I announced to my father that was a waste of garden space. And I've never been a practical person ever. But this man in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan had been hand selecting these peanuts for almost 4 decades. And then when he heard about Fruition Seeds, right when we started, he sent us some seeds to try, and they're amazing. So yes, my father loves to grow peanuts in containers, and I hope that you do too. So cucumbers are also wonderful to grow in containers, but here's the thing. you want to get bush varieties rather than full-size varieties. If you've grown cucumbers before, you know they have these long trailing 5-foot vines that can just, you know, take over. But there are bush cucumbers out there in the world. And also, so ironically, both of our bush, we have a bush slicer, like a full-size American slicer that has some powdery mildew resistance, which is awesome. And also a pickler, just called bush pickle. And so this is the bush pickle, but this is actually one of the community art packets for the moment. And this is John Ballou, an amazing artist in Rochester. He made this lino cut and actually printed it on a press from the mid-1800s. And I just love John. So yes, you can totally grow cucumbers in containers. And you can grow tomatoes in containers, and check it out. There are all these dwarf tomatoes in the world. Here are just a few. And the thing is, those dwarf containers, dwarf tomatoes, they only get 2.5, 3 feet tall max. So they're very easy to manage, contain. They need to be trellised ideally. They can hack it without it, but the trellising allows you to harvest the fruits that much easier and keeps the foliage aloft so that the fruits actually mature that much sooner and more quickly. So yeah, if you can find dwarf plants, they're way more productive generally than other kinds. With the exception of a lot of cherries, or also cherry tomatoes can also be really productive in containers. And with your tomatoes, peppers, don't hesitate, put them in the biggest container you've got. Honestly, I never recommend them less than 15 gallons because they are just so hungry. And again, they have leaves, yes, but they're wanting to flower and fruit, which takes even more energy. So yes, those are really important. And there's some more compact peppers than others. So like our jalapeno is super early and super compact as well. You'll note eggplant, not on this list. I have never seen an eggplant thrive in a container garden. And I have a few other things at the end that I will share as like, just don't do it. Don't torture yourself or your plants. But in the meantime, there's a few more. We have our root vegetables. So radishes grow really easily, as well as these sweet little creamy white turnips. And kohlrabi is another wonderful choice. Oh my gosh. And I did want to mention a lot of people, I'm so psyched that unusual esoteric vegetables are kind of in vogue, but whoa, watermelon radishes, so cool. They're a fall radish. So plant them at the beginning of August, right when you're planting your dwarf peas. Your life and your containers will be so much more abundant. And beets, totally possible to grow. And full-size long carrots only grow in these 15-gallon containers or larger, but there are little baby carrots. The variety that we love and share is called Paris Market, but they're like the size of big golf balls, and they grow really well in stony soil and clay soil, but if you've got containers, they really thrive in containers too. So now let's talk about some flowers, and then I'll share varieties that I highly encourage you to resist sowing. So here, the general rule about these flowers too, some of them are native, and a lot of the others are from Mediterranean climates, which are more hot and more arid, a lot less moisture. And so that will help them thrive in containers all the more. So cosmos are amazing and super drought tolerant, and they tend to be several feet tall, even in a crack in the sidewalk. So they're an amazing choice. And we have a dwarf variety of this orange called Buddha's hand, which is really marvelous. The nasturtiums, you'll see, I'm sure you've seen, they love growing in containers as well, and they're delicious. Bachelor's buttons, wonderful choice, also from the Mediterranean, so super drought tolerant. Again, edible petals, marvelous. And zinnias don't mind growing in containers. They tend to be a little more picky, but they can totally hack it. You just want to make sure they're not quite as drought tolerant as nasturtiums, as calendula, as And so this Love in a Mist, Nigella, another awesome choice of a drought-tolerant plant. Borage, too, is remarkable. Once it's established, it just hangs on and doesn't mind growing in relatively poor environments. Calendula, too, just doesn't mind the crack in the sidewalk. And amaranth as well is closely related. This Love Lies Bleeding is such a morose name, but such a beautiful flower, both cut and dry, fresh and dry rather. And again, you know, it's related to pigweed, a classic weed in our gardens. So it kind of grows like a weed, to be honest with you. And there are dwarf sunflowers as well that totally thrive in containers. And like any sunflower, it grows in a range, so with less fertility, it'll be smaller. With more fertility, it will be larger. So if you want really small containers, small sunflowers, put them in smaller containers with less soil, and you'll be good to go. So here is, wow, this is such a long laundry list. Here are the things that you really want to avoid growing in containers. And I'll just apologize now for the heartbreak. Corn is just not a good idea to grow in containers. And maybe for the sake of time, I'll just speed through and not tell you why. But squash, whether it's winter squash, summer squash, if it's a bush, if you've got a 15-gallon container, if you can't stand no for an answer, go for it. But don't skimp on the fertility, and don't be surprised when they're not nearly as abundant as what other people are finding in their gardens. Melons also, whether it's cantaloupe or a beautiful watermelon, they really don't thrive in containers. Oh, so sad. And that eggplant that I mentioned, she just doesn't love growing in containers at all. So yes, there you have the massively long list. So the good news is there's lots of things that you can grow in containers, and space-efficient varieties make all the difference. So now number 3, let's talk about taking soil seriously from the start. So what you give is what you get, and that is certainly true in container gardening. So you don't want to skimp on nutrients. So a lot of people will make the very common and understandable mistake of simply filling their containers with potting mix because it's cheap and it's very available, and that's how you fill a container. That seems easy. And the thing is, potting mix has been designed to start plants, to germinate little seedlings. And so it's a growing medium, but it's not a matrix for life. And so potting mix doesn't generally have as many nutrients as plants need, especially if they're going to flower and fruit like a tomato, like a pepper, like a zinnia. So it's really important. So what I like to do is fill our containers half with just a potting mix, the nicest, most nutrient-dense potting mix we can find, plus 50% compost. And I mix those really well in. And we also, if you can find worm castings, amazing. Worm castings are they're like the perfect pH for growing vegetables, and they're essentially probiotic. They're alive as well, which you want. The soil that's living has a lot more nutrient turnover, which is so key for plants. If you can also find like a granular fertilizer, that's amazing too. I highly recommend making sure it's organic because it'll grow healthier plants, and healthier plants have healthier immune systems, so they're not as susceptible to diseases and pest insects. And this is actually a mix that my partner Matthew loves to make all kinds of amendments for different plants. And so this is a mix of tons of things, and we have it on our website as well. And we mix a 1/4 cup of it in every gallon of soil. And we mix it in a wheelbarrow. So we're mixing it so that every square inch, when we're filling this entire container, every square inch has something totally delicious for those plant roots to find. And that makes all the difference. So yes, it's a really common mistake to just and to reuse soil in containers as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end with all things come to an end. But that also is just asking for peril certainly less abundance. So yes, there are a few thoughts on soil. And knowing which plants also you're growing makes a big difference too, because if you're planning on just growing beautiful lettuces, you don't need, I still recommend like, give them the everything you can. But if you're trying to grow a tomato, don't mess around. Like, if you actually want to not only grow a green tomato plant, but be harvesting beautiful fresh tomatoes and dozens of them off a single plant, you need to feed her. And there are so many ways to approach that fertility. And certainly, you know, when I'm transplanting, I dunk these plants in water first and in dilute fish emulsion. We'll talk about that in a few minutes too. But feeding it not only from the soil, but actually feeding it throughout the season as well. Foliar feeding or root drenching it is absolutely critical to get all of those fruiting crops to be genuinely abundant in a container all season. So now let's talk about light. And let there be light, like solar arrays. These leaves are the original solar array on this planet. Well, actually, I don't think that's true. There were little photosynthesizing bacteria first. So there's a long history of solar arrays. I mean, that's really the story of life on Earth, maybe. But anyway, I digress. Let there be light. The more light your garden has, the more productive it's going to have. All of that light is allowing photosynthesis to happen, allowing your plants to generate their own sugars, their own food. And so with less light, it's going to be more stressful for them, for your plants, to be healthy and thriving. So the more light, the better. And if you can move your containers, brilliant. So something that you can keep in mind too, some things actually don't want as much light. Specifically, they don't want as much heat in the summer. So for example, and you can think about it this way too, like a dark container has that much more capacity to generate thermal mass, maintain thermal mass. So things that want heat, like your tomatoes, like your peppers, oh man, put them in black containers. You can totally grow ginger. Peanuts love growing in black containers because it increases their heat, and that just increases your ultimate abundance. On the other hand, lettuce, basil, especially, how many of you have had thyme or pardon me, cilantro and dill that bolts way too fast, right? So if you put that in a more pale container, suddenly it doesn't have the thermal mass, it doesn't bolt, send up its seed stalk and flower and become bitter and fibrous. It doesn't bolt as quickly in a more pale container. Also, if you can move your container with your lettuce behind suddenly a tomato plant, then your lettuce won't bolt and go raise up that seed stalk and go to seed as quickly. So having movable containers, you can really leverage who wants light when and where in what season, and you've got all of those options. So number 5, good neighbors and no crowding equals great abundance. So good neighbors and no crowding, what does that actually look like? And in the 8 Keys of Container Gardening mini course that's now totally free that I hope you jump into, I share a lot of those different interplantings, but here's the general idea. So for example, this tomato is pretty small, and it's in this massive 15-gallon container. And I guess maybe I'm just American or like impatient in the worst sense. And I'm like, that looks like a lot of wasted garden space. And there are times to check ourselves. And there are also times to pay attention to those voices and say, well, maybe I could grow lettuce mix. So check it out. I don't know if you can see, and can I lift this up? There's actually 3-day-old mesclun mix growing in a great big donut around this tomato. So that way I'm gonna harvest cut and come again like baby mesclun mix from around this tomato for the next 4, 5, maybe even 6 weeks, by the time this tomato is massive and overshadowing anything that would be beneath it, making this 5-gallon, 15-gallon container look small, then I'll have harvested plenty of lettuce. And because the root system of this tomato is way down in, and the mescaline mix is really shallow, they're not competing for nutrients. They're not competing for light above the ground. They're not competing for nutrients below the ground. So that makes all the difference. So that's a great example of good neighbors. I also will plant scallions, honestly, in lots of our containers because they just grow so effortlessly up. And because you can imagine scallions, their leaves hardly shadow anything around them. And so the scallions in between all these lettuces all of a sudden aren't overshadowing, even though they're almost a foot taller than the lettuce. They're not shadowing the lettuce in any significant way. And so that's another example of interplanting. 2, I'll give you one more, and know that there's a bunch more in the container gardening mini course, which is free on our website. So beans are another example where you plant beans and you're going to have a lot of empty space in your container for the next, solidly week, but solidly really a month before the bean foliage canopy really closes in. So a month is not a lot of time, but honestly, it's the perfect amount of time to get 1, even 2 cuttings of dill or cilantro. So arugula included. So I'll just tuck those dill, a row of cilantro, a row of arugula, mescaline mix in between the rows of beans as they grow. Yeah, imagining and that's where having an imagination for what is the ultimate plant size and how much can I kind of push the envelope of, who has light and when and why. So those are a few things to keep in mind. I wanted to mention in that context too, think outside the row in container gardening. You often see, and I don't know that agriculture, so the last 10,000 years that we've been saving seed and growing food and creating this incredible legacy that we now call agriculture, the vast majority of that was not grown in rows. Rows are a very new invention, and our mechanized, highly commodified, commercial, industrial scale agriculture has taken it to the next level. So think outside the row. Let me count the ways. And certainly in containers, it's largely, rows are a really wonderful way to ensure that you can weed easily. And there's a lot of great reasons and tools to weed easily, but in a container, you've got mostly just compost, potting mix. You don't have the weed seed bank that's going to be in a garden soil. So you really don't have the weed pressure generally in container gardens that you do even in raised beds and certainly in garden soil. So honestly, with this huge container of lettuce, it's all lettuce. And if you're growing mescaline mix, I'm just throwing it in here. It is a carpet of baby salad greens, a carpet of cilantro. So they're not in the rows in containers. So that way you're really kind of optimizing your actual growing surface area. So think outside the row. Let me count the ways. I wanted to mention too that you can totally grow potatoes in containers. It's a little different. Just make sure that you are only fill it up halfway, because potatoes only grow above the mother potato. So if you fill up your container with soil, which I highly recommend unless you're growing potatoes, then you're going to plant the potato at the top, and by the end of the season you'll harvest not many potatoes, because potatoes don't grow adjacent to the mother potato. They don't grow below the mother potato. They only grow above that mother potato. So I'll only fill this container halfway, and I will then plant the potato, and then throughout the course of the season, when it's a foot 16 inches tall, I'll cover it by half, and miraculously that stem will turn into roots, will turn into tubers that we like to call potatoes. So I have this wonderful memory of growing potatoes in my father's garden in great big containers, have wine barrels, and we would at the end of the season, all summer long, we'd be throwing in grass clippings and hay and straw and compost and whatever we could find. And then at the end of the season, my sister and I got to push over the barrel and all of the soil would come spilling out and all the potatoes would go spilling out. And it was so much fun. So yeah, in terms of good neighbors and no crowding equals more abundance, there are things to combine, and I hope that you do. There are infinite permutations, but just know that some things, ginger and potatoes and peanuts being one of them, really don't play well with others, mostly because they just have very specific growth patterns for themselves. So now let's briefly touch on watering. So just early and often is a key to keep in mind. And the more that you have something like coconut coir or peat moss in your potting mix, those things hold on to more water more readily than a lot of other potting mixes. So yeah, the container gardening, containers dry out really fast. There's no other way to say it. And that's another reason why big containers are better, because they tend to dry out less quickly. There's just less surface area exposed to the air and the environment around them. So yes, and water early in the morning and is the most important time to be watering. And especially here in, in the Finger Lakes and Rochester and Western New York, we have lots of this wonderful phenomena called water falling from the sky. So there are lots of areas of the world that don't have that phenomena. So we're really fortunate that we don't have to always be watering. But that being said, that water is also the primary vector for every disease on the planet. And so if you're watering at night when it's cool and the water can really soak in, that's wonderful, except that is increasing the leaf humidity all through the night. And that will increase your plant's susceptibility to diseases. So anytime you can water early in the morning and water deeply, watering deeply is always better than watering shallowly. So if you water more deeply and less often, that's way better than watering shallowly, but then having to just water all the time. So drip systems are totally possible to set up, or spray hoses. I prefer drip because the moisture goes down into the soil instead of being sprayed up. Again, reducing leaf humidity makes all the difference for reducing your disease susceptibility. And yeah, often the biggest limiting factor in people and their container garden is having too few nutrients and too little water. So watering can become a full-time job depending on the weather here in Zone 5. So now we're getting to the end, and then I can't wait for some Q&A. Number 7 is succession sowing, and man, there is just so much to share about this. But I wanted to share with you too, there's this lovely little planting calendar that we made, and perhaps you already have one. Certainly if you've ordered from Fruition Seeds, we put this postcard in every single order. But even if you haven't ordered from us and don't ever plan on it, I still love you. I am happy to share all of this without attachment. We have a blog, and you can download this on our blog. And we also have this direct seeding charts that has all kinds of succession sowing info here in this little book that I made, which is also a free download on our website. So I hope you'll check it out. Rise and Shine Starting Seeds with Ease is 40 pages of starting seeds, indoors, outdoors, tons of stuff, including, check it out, there's a direct sow chart, a transplant chart that has tons of great info so that you know what you can anticipate to be succession sowing and whatnot. But as a general rule, greens are phenomenal to succession sow, and beets, carrots, turnips, radishes, basically if they have a shorter day to maturity, they will succession sow brilliantly. And take notes. I can't recommend highly enough, and do as I say and not as I do. I am notoriously like, whee, that was fun. And I forget to make notes of what I did. And then if it's wonderful, awesome, maybe I'll remember to do it that way in the future. But if it didn't turn out that well, also, you know, taking notes makes all the difference. And so there's lots of different ways to take notes. We certainly didn't take any notes growing up in my father's garden. And Dave, our farm manager, there are 7 of us full-time at Fruition Seeds, and Dave, our farm manager, has extensive Excel spreadsheets. So if that's your style, go for it. And we also made this awesome little across the seasons perpetual calendar. So if you have any other perpetual calendars in your life, this is an awesome resource too, because check it out. It has dates, but not days of the week. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's years. So you can see like, oh, in 2020, here it is June, we planted the corn on June 1st. And then we finished our cucurbits on the 2nd. Oh, and it's the 5th. It's Leah Penniman's birthday. Amazing. So I record all kinds of exciting things, including when the birds return, when I'm harvesting fiddleheads. And check it out. There's this other section in the back too that is let's dig in, because here is another awesome way to take notes. And this is by crop type, where the rest of the calendar is juxtaposing your carrots and your zinnias and your everything. This is section crop by crop. So here's garlic, here's tomatoes, and I can write down the variety name and the seed source and the date I planted it, the date soil was worked, the spacing, and all kinds of other details, so that across the seasons, you can really be taking notes of what's working, what's not, so that you can be amplifying abundance in all seasons to come. And so our final key is all things come to an end, including this extensive monologue. You're so gracious. And that includes your container gardens too. And so there's just no way around it. They're going to look awful at the end of the season on a number of accounts, and you don't need to feel ashamed or embarrassed. It just is what's going to happen. And don't hesitate to put the entire compost, the entire container into your compost. I think of your soil in your containers as sponges. And so, you know, if you wring out a sponge, you have to put water on it for it to expand and become sponge-like again. And so the same is true with soil. And certainly in the context of container gardening, you are wringing out all of the nutrients in this container throughout the season, especially if you're growing a tomato or anything that's flowering, fruiting, or a kale, Swiss chard that you're harvesting all season long. You'll see when you dump them out, those roots will fill up every square millimeter of generally of your container. And so they're wringing out all of those nutrients. And so although it looks a lot like soil still, and it looks a lot like a sponge, it doesn't have the capacity that it once did. And I really struggle throwing things away. And I really struggle even now putting all of that soil on the compost. But the thing is, you're not throwing it away, you're putting it on the compost. So you're putting that soil, your container soil, right back into what you're ultimately going to be putting back in anyway. So again, we put 1/2 of our soil, of our containers, their 1/2 is potting mix, really, really nice potting mix. The other half is compost. So you don't think of it as throwing away those nutrients, throwing away that soil. Think of it as replenishing your sponge. And yes, and I can't tell you how many times I've been like, how about I just put half of it on the compost? Or like, I push this envelope a lot over across the years. And what I've learned is simply this: just let it go into the compost, let it replenish itself, and you will be that much more happy with the abundance in your life. So yeah, I think let's open it up for a little Q&A, and then let's plant a container together.
So if anyone has a question, if you look to the lower left-hand corner of your screen, there's like a little icon of a microphone. And if you click on that, the red slash through it will go away and you can ask a question if you have one.
And curious gardeners are the best gardeners. Don't be shy.
And if you would rather do it through chat, that's fine too. I can read your question out to Petra.
I guess I have a question.
Fabulous.
I had horses for a number of years, and we used sawdust to bed the horses with, no hay or no straw. And as we cleaned out the barn, we put it in one pile, and it's been several years since we've had the horses, so that's just been sitting there, and we often use that. Is that considered good compost or not?
Yeah, I would say if it's fully composted, i.e. it looks not at all like sawdust,
No,
and
not
it doesn't, then absolutely go for it.
So I could mix that with my potting soil.
Totally. That
Okay.
sounds dreamy.
Okay.
The
sounds
most, a common mistake with compost is people not letting it fully ripen and mature. A compost, if it doesn't smell rich and just like beautiful earth, like rich humus, fungal, if it smells at all like ew, then it's not ready yet. And if you can also see materials.
Right,
and
there's a lovely weed bed over it, so we have to kind of break that down. And then get toward the bottom of it to get the actual compost. So.
Yes. Awesome. You are so fortunate. You are so fortunate.
Okay, just checking. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. I'll start prepping for planting a little container. But if there's any other questions, jump on in, friends. Sweet. So yes, I am going to play with this container now, and I hope that if you have a container, join right along. So I confess, this is a smaller container than I usually grow in, but it's very easy to maneuver and show you exactly what I'm doing, so that's why I chose it. But that I hope that you know, oh man, this is a 5-gallon container, and it's about as small as I would ever recommend anybody growing anything. So I've already put some soil in, and it's soil that so it's half potting mix with half our compost. And I also mixed in prior this granular slow release organic fertilizer that we share, and a 1/4 cup in a gallon. I'll put a little bit extra in. We also designed it so that with certain things, like with this, if people put in more, it's not the end of the world. You're not going to burn or hurt your plants. By contrast, if you are getting the fish emulsion, this or any other kind of concentrated foliar feed for your plants, I can't recommend it highly enough, but you can totally burn plants and also attract skunks and possums and other scavenger mammals if you don't honor the proper dilution rates. So 1 ounce of fish emulsion goes into 1 gallon of water. But if you go a little heavy, generally on the slow release fertilizers, it's far from the end of the world. So I filled it up most of the way, but oh man, I'm gonna still fill it up all of the way, because here's the thing, and maybe you can see in this container, I actually filled this container last week, and I filled it up to the top, and look, it just compresses so quickly. And that's partially because potting mix is very light and airy. So as the season goes on, every time it rains, all those particles just compact. All the lofty air pockets begin to compact. So you want to, at the very beginning, just fill up your container right to the very top. And with that exception, the only exception being ginger, which you want to hill, and also potatoes, which you want to hill. So I'm going to fill it up right to the top. And I've moistened this potting mix quite a lot as well. I am going to water in after I plant, but I just like it starting out moist. So what I find is that container gardens are easier to keep nice and perfectly moist. If they start moist, it's harder. Once they get dry, it's harder for them to rehydrate. So just start them nice and hydrated at the beginning, especially if you're, hot tip, if you're growing container and you like arugula and it's early in the season and you don't want to have cold, you can actually use hot water and your hands are that much more comfortable, and it will help your seeds germinate a tiny bit faster as well. So given that it's a 5-gallon container, I'm going to resist planting peppers, tomatoes, anything that is significantly large and wants to flower and fruit. So this is a perfect size container for kale or the little dwarf marigold. So here is a marvelous little kale transplant. And this is that Vates, a dwarf green ruffled kale. And so and same true for all transplants, whether it's in containers, whether it's in raised beds, whether it's garden soil, dunk them in water first. That helps just loosen up the soil and also give the growing rootlet edges just exactly what they need to be like, oh yeah, right, this is what we're doing, we're growing. And go the next step, actually put it in dilute fish emulsion. So here's that marvelous little cocktail of 1 ounce into 1 gallon, cheers. And I'm going to dunk it fully in, and ta-da, now I am just going to plant it right here. And then this is the perfect size for 1 full-size plant of kale. And again, because I just kind of love cilantro and growing all kinds of other things, I am going to find my cilantro packet here in the mix. Woohoo! Yes, where did it go? And I'm going to get that cilantro and I'm going to plant it out all around. So I'm going to basically make a great big kind of donut of cilantro around it. Oh yes, here are the herbs. Oh my gosh, so many wonderful choices. Dill is another wonderful choice. Lettuce mix or mesclun mix would be another great choice. But I know there's that percentage of the population that doesn't like cilantro. I'm so grateful I'm not in that population. So I'm gonna open it up. Oh, and take a look too on the back of our packets. So on the front of the packets, it has lots of great growing info, like how many row feet it sows and height, days to maturity. But on the back, it actually has growing instructions. And there's also a back tab that has all kinds of great info, like spacing between planting and when to sow and how deep to sow. And yeah, whether you direct sow it or transplant it. With cilantro, it loves to grow in the cold. So you can actually plant it first thing when the snow melts, and all the way till honestly the end of September here. But certainly in the summer, it loves to grow too. It just is stressed by the heat. So I'm going to actually go a little wild and plant 1/2 of this container is going to be cilantro. And then the other half is going to be dill, and that will be so much fun. And again, so I'm going to harvest the cilantro and the dill on the other side in about, I'll probably harvest it in 3 weeks. And then I'll harvest it maybe one other time. And then by that time, this central kale plant will be much larger and fully coming into its own. So then it will just be that by the end of the season. A kale plant for the rest of the season. So, oh my gosh, actually, I'm gonna plant some baby Tulsi basil on the other half instead. And yes, you're knowing so much of what a gardener I am right now. I'm like, oh, this would be fun. Oh, no, that would be fun. There's as many ways to garden as there are gardeners. So don't, please, like, see what I'm doing and use it as just a template, and then make your own joy and have so much fun and ask all kinds of people. And honestly, here we are today. I hope we get to share a few more questions, and if any of you have any container gardening stories, nightmares that you want to relay, that's really invaluable. When we all share, the more we all share, the more we all know, and the more we all grow together. So now that I've sowed some seeds on top, I'm going to take some more of this potting mix, and I'm going to just put a little bit of sprinkle over the top. And so as a general rule, you only want to sow seeds twice their depth. So another really common mistake that a lot of gardeners, beginning gardeners, make is to simply plant seeds too deep. So you only want to sow seeds twice their depth, which isn't very deep at all. So there we have a lovely little container. And if you want to label, like cilantro on this side, dill on this side, or Tulsi basil on this side, amazing. And if you don't want to label it, that's fine too. I tend to encourage people to label things early on, and especially but I confess I came to you here in this present moment without having prepped a label. So I won't, so now you know I do that. I can't tell you how many plants and things I've made anonymous in my days. So do as I say and not as I do, perhaps sometimes, and certainly in this case. But yeah, I'm really excited to now just water them in. And so I'm going to take this dilute fish emulsion, and I'm just going to water them in. And if you have something that mists, misting is actually way better than what I'm doing pouring right now. So if you have, whether it's a garden can, a watering can, or something that's going to create smaller droplets that will integrate more finely, like evenly, that is marvelous. But you know, I'm a really big fan of using what you've got at your fingertips. And so from here, I'm going to take this outside. I'm going to put it in the warmest and most sunny spot that I have, because even though these are leaves, and leaves can have less sun than other flowering, fruiting plants, you'll get that much more abundance if it has full light. So whether and this is a nice principle for, you know, whether you're planting in a larger container, here's your one tomato with a bunch of salad mix or herbs around it. This is a really fun little, or like with herbs too, I'll often plant like a basil plant in the middle, and then, which is much taller than parsley. And so I'll have like a ring of parsley on the outside. And so from here, I mean, wow, the journey is ours to enjoy. And I hope that you know that you are never alone, and that I am totally here for you. And yeah, you can follow us on Instagram, on Facebook every day. We're sharing how-tos and little behind the scenes stories from the farm. And whether it's on our website or YouTube channel, there are so many ways that we are just sharing all kinds of how-tos, compliments of fruition, because we love you and we want you to be surrounded by the abundance and beauty that gives us so much joy, so that we all can be surrounded by that much more beauty and joy in our lives. So thanks again for Alexis and the Wood Library, and then all the other 15 libraries that collaborated to make this series possible this summer. And I'm just so thrilled to continue on the journey. And yeah, I am at your service most joyfully and most humbly, friends. So please don't be shy.
Hi, there are a few more questions. So in the chat, someone wanted to know, where do they get the fabric containers and do you sell them?
We do. Yeah, our website is fruitionseeds.com. So you can find them there. And I imagine there are the other local nurseries that may have some, especially in COVID times. I'd give them a call first, just before you make the journey. But yeah, they've become really popular the last few years, and they're really quite remarkable. And ours are recycled plastic water bottles, made here in the US and Illinois. And yeah, I hope you can find some, my friend. It's far from too late.
The next question is, Sarah has lemon balm. She'd like to move to a container. Other than tea, are there other good uses for lemon balm?
Admittedly, that's the main use that I have for lemon balm. Otherwise, I garnish cocktails with them sometimes. I also crush them and put them into salad dressings. So that's another way to use them. I also love making herbal vinegars. So tossing some of those lemon balm leaves into vinegar, especially with chives and sage, like chive blossoms, which 'tis the season. They are just in their prime right now. But yeah, I think of them mostly as tea. You can also make a tincture of them, and lemon balm is deeply nervine, so it's very calming to our nervous system. It has been a very important medicinal herb for a long time, and perhaps now more than ever, we all need nervines in our lives. So you can concentrate the compounds, and in a tincture form as well.
Deanna would like to know, when watering plants, should we water around the base of the plant, or is it okay to just use the spray setting on the hose nozzle and spray the whole plant?
Fabulous question. So I always recommend watering at the base as much as possible. And here is why. In our climate, we have so many bacterial, fungal diseases that are spread by humidity and incubated by humidity. So the more you can increase airflow around your plants and decrease leaf humidity, the more your plants will be resistant to diseases. So if you are, and another reason too, if you're not watering first thing in the morning, then those water droplets on your leaves can actually act as magnifying glasses. So they like concentrate the rays of the sun and actually burn the leaves. So that's another reason to just water first thing in the morning. But otherwise, I love to, as much as I can, just get right in and water the roots as much as possible, so that I'm decreasing leaf humidity, so that I'm decreasing our susceptibility to disease.
And this is the last question. Alexis would like to know, if she wanted to plant potatoes, what else could she grow in the same container?
Ooh, devastation ensues. Nothing! I know, it's so devastating. Potatoes just have such a unique growth habit, and so they don't really grow like any other plant. So many other things you can companion plant, and certainly you can plant lots of things in containers right around your container of potatoes. But honestly, I wouldn't plant anything else in that container except for potatoes, because like how I grow potatoes too, I fill a container halfway and then I'm just filling it up for the rest of the season. I wouldn't do that with anything else. With anything like this pepper plant, this kale, if they have the stem buried at all, they're just going to rot. And that stem will just rot. And so tomatoes, their stem won't rot, but they'll just be otherwise like, why am I living here with the potatoes? And also their growth, their foliage doesn't compute, they don't play well with each other. They're not good neighbors, tomatoes and potatoes. So even though they both have stems that can transition and remarkably go from stem tissue and become root tissue, you still need to keep them in different containers. So yeah, but the good news is, I mean, you can plant a potato 8 inches away from another potato. So in a big container, I would put, 5, 6 pieces of a potato in this one container. So you can grow a lot of potatoes in a single container. Yeah, and I can't wait to hear how they grow, Alexis.
Well, that was our last question for today. And I just want to remind people, if you attended today's class and maybe you're not registered for the other 2 classes, you can still register. Just check with your library. There's an online form. We have a link. You just click on the link and you'll go to the form and you can sign up for the other 2 classes. It's not too late, plenty of time. Thank you, Petra. You did a great job. It was very
Thank you.
Learned a lot. Maybe I'll be able to do outdoor plants now.
Yes. I just would love to thank the libraries again, and especially you, Alexis. And I also just want to take this moment and thank my father and countless mentors and friends in my life who have been so generous with their knowledge, with their love, and entrusted me with all of these things and the courage to just experiment and learn things anew. And all of their forefathers and foremothers going back centuries and millennia, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. And it is such a privilege to be where we are in this moment and be able to share all of these gifts that we have been given, whether they're seeds, soil, this sunshine. We're just surrounded by the gifts of an incredibly life-affirming planet. And I feel so grateful to be in service of all of those ancestors and all of these seeds and all of the soil, so that we can all be surrounded by that much more abundance. And I look forward to next time. Did I mention?
Yeah, we do too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Petra.
Everyone, and have a great weekend.
My pleasure. You too. Enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.